For years, one thing about the F-35 seemed certain. If a war became too dangerous for older fighters, this was the aircraft America would send in, stealthy enough to survive, smart enough to see first, connected enough to guide the rest of the force. And for a long time, that assumption held. So when people say the F-35 has a range problem, it sounds almost misleading, because on paper, the jet can fly far. It carries a large amount of internal fuel. It was built to operate as part of a larger combat network. And in many parts of the world, that network works. Bases are close enough. Tankers can reach the fight. Fuel, weapons, and maintenance can keep moving forward. Everything lines up. Everything functions. Until it doesn't. Because the Western Pacific is different. Here, distance turns every support aircraft into a vulnerability. Every forward base into a target. Every runway into a pressure point. And China appears to understand that better than most people expected. Because China does not need to build a better F-35 to create a problem for the F-35. It only needs to pressure the system that lets the aircraft reach the fight. The runways, the tankers, the fuel stores, the base is close enough to matter. And if those start to disappear, if those links begin to break, then suddenly something changes. That is why this problem is bigger than range. The real question is not whether the F-35 can fly. It is whether the system around it can survive long enough for the jet to arrive. Because if it can't, then the moment the F-35 is needed most, it may already be too late. The first thing that breaks the F-35's range story is not the aircraft. It is the map. Because if you look at the jet by itself, the problem does not seem serious. The F-35A has strong range for a tactical fighter. It carries fuel inside the aircraft, so it can stay stealthy. It can enter dangerous airspace, gather data, strike targets, and pass information to the rest of the force. That is exactly why the United States and its allies built so much of their future air power around it. But a fighter does not launch from a spec sheet. It launches from a base. And in the Western Pacific, that base is either close enough to be useful or far enough away to be safer. It is very hard to be both. Okinawa is close enough to matter, but that also means it is exposed. Guam gives more distance. But now the aircraft has to cross a much larger stretch of ocean before it reaches the fight. That gap has to be filled by tankers, fuel, maintenance, weapons, and command networks. This is the part that makes the F-35 different from a bomber. It can reach far, but it cannot carry the war by itself across Pacific distances. It needs the system around it. And once that system becomes vulnerable, the question changes. Not how advanced is the aircraft, not how stealthy is it, not even how far can it fly. The real question becomes much harder. Can America keep enough F-35s close enough, fueled enough, and ready enough when China starts attacking the places that make all of that possible? This is where the story becomes more uncomfortable, because the obvious comparison is fighter against fighter. America has the F-35. China has its own stealth aircraft. So people ask the same question every time. Which jet is better? But that may not be the question China is trying to answer. China does not need to build a perfect F-35 equivalent if it can attack the conditions that allow the F-35 to operate. And those conditions are much easier to find. A stealth fighter is hard to track in the air. A runway is not. A fuel depot is not. A tanker base is not. A maintenance hangar is not. These are fixed, visible, and essential. That is what makes them valuable targets. Because the F-35 is not just a flying machine. It is the front end of a much larger system. And if China can slow that system down, the aircraft becomes less useful without ever being defeated directly. This is a very different kind of air power contest. It is not about proving which fighter wins in a clean duel. It is about timing. Access, pressure. Can the United States keep aircraft launching after the first strikes? Can tankers operate close enough to matter? Can crews repair runways fast enough? Can fuel and weapons keep moving while bases are under threat? That is the real contest. And this is why China's missile force matters so much. Not because one missile solved the F-35, but because enough missiles aim at the right parts of support network can make the F-35 arrive later, fly less often, and operate from farther away. That is when the range problem stops being theoretical. It becomes operational. The clearest warning did not come from a dogfight. It came from a study about runways. That sounds ordinary, but it is exactly the kind of detail that decides whether air power works. Because a fighter can be ready, the pilot can be ready, the weapons can be loaded, but if the runway is cratered, the aircraft is not part of the fight. It is stuck beside it. This is what makes the Pacific problem so serious. China does not need to destroy every aircraft. It does not need to find every F-35 in the sky. It only needs to interrupt the rhythm, close enough runways, delay enough launches, force enough aircraft to move farther back, and suddenly, the most advanced fighter in the world is still powerful, but less available. The Stimson Center looked at this problem in practical terms. Runways, taxiways, repair times, base layouts, not the glamorous parts of war, the parts that decide whether jets can actually take off after the first missiles land. Their conclusion was uncomfortable. Chinese missile attacks could prevent fighter operations from American bases in Japan for about 12 days. From Guam and other Pacific locations, the disruption could last nearly 2 days. That matters because those are not random days. They're the opening days. The moment when speed matters most. The moment when commanders need aircraft in the air, not waiting for concrete to be repaired. And this is where the story changes. The first battle may not be F-35 against Chinese fighter. It may be missile against runway, because if the runway loses, the aircraft never gets to prove how advanced it is. And once the runway problem appears, another problem follows immediately. Tankers. They're easy to ignore because they are not the aircraft people came to watch. They are large, slow, unstealthy, and usually treated like background support. But in the Pacific, tankers are not background support. They are the bridge. They're what allows fighters to launch from safer distances and still reach the fight. So if China can threaten the bases tankers use, or force tankers to operate farther away, the F-35's range problem gets worse fast. Because now the fighter has to spend a lot of fuel just getting to the fuel. That sounds simple, but operationally it changes everything. Less time near the target, fewer aircraft arriving together, more pressure on planning, more pressure on crews, more pressure on the next wave of launches. This is why the tanker issue may be even more dangerous than the runway issue. A damaged runway can sometimes be repaired. A tanker forced too far back changes the entire shape of the mission. And this is where the F-35's impressive design runs into something it cannot engineer away. Distance. The aircraft can be stealthy. It can carry advanced sensors. It can survive in places older aircraft cannot. But it still burns fuel. It still has a return. And it still depends on a refueling network that China can study, track, and pressure. That is what makes the range problem so hard to solve. It is not just inside the aircraft. It is outside the aircraft. In the tankers. In the bases. In the timing. In the fragile chain that has to keep working while missiles are trying to break it. And if that chain starts to bend, the F-35 may still be dangerous. But it becomes dangerous less often. The United States knows it cannot depend on a few large bases forever. So the answer is dispersal. Spread the aircraft out. Use more airfields. Move faster. Make China search across a wider map. On paper, this makes sense. If one base is too obvious, use several. If one runway is too exposed, shift aircraft somewhere else. If China wants to target American air power, force it to chase a moving network instead of hitting a single point. This is the idea behind agile combat employment, and it is probably necessary, but it is not free, because every location that launches an F-35 also needs the things that keep an F-35 alive. Fuel, weapons, parts, tools, power, communications, security, repair crews, people who know how to maintain one of the most complicated fighters ever built. That is where the solution becomes difficult. Dispersal makes aircraft harder to destroy, but it also makes the system harder to run. And in a Pacific war, that matters, because the question is not only whether aircraft survive the first strike. The question is whether they can keep flying after it. Can they refuel and reload quickly? Can damaged aircraft be repaired away from major bases? Can small teams keep up when the distances are huge and the pressure is constant? This is where China benefits from friction. It does not need every strike to work perfectly. It only needs to slow the rhythm, make each launch harder, make each repair take longer, make each refueling plan more complicated. Because once that happens, the F-35 is still dangerous, but the system around it starts working harder for every hour it stays in the fight. This is why the solutions are not as simple as they sound. Add more fuel, use longer range weapons, build future tankers, spread aircraft across more bases, develop a new fighter with more reach. All of that helps. None of it removes the problem, because each answer creates a trade-off. External fuel can extend endurance, but it can also change how the aircraft flies and how exposed it becomes. Longer range weapons let the F-35 strike from farther away, but they do not solve every mission. A missile can reach a target, but it cannot replace aircraft presence. It cannot patrol. It cannot escort. It cannot keep watching a battlefield that keeps moving. Future tankers may be more survivable, but until they exist in numbers, the current refueling problem remains. And dispersed bases may make China's targeting harder, but they also stretch the people, fuel, weapons, and maintenance needed to keep aircraft flying. That is the pattern. Every fix helps one part of the system, while adding pressure somewhere else. And this is why the F-35 range problem keeps coming back. It is not one missing feature. It is not one design flaw. It is the result of trying to use tactical aircraft across one of the hardest theaters on Earth against a country that has built its strategy around distance, missiles, and disruption. The F-35 can still be lethal, but the harder question is how often it can be there, how long it can stay, and how much of the system has to survive just to make that possible. So this is where the F-35 range problem becomes clearer. It is not that the jet cannot fly far. It can. It is not that the aircraft has no role in the Pacific. It does. And it is not that China has found some simple way to make stealth irrelevant. That would be too easy. The real problem is more practical and much harder to solve. The F-35 depends on a chain. A base close enough to launch from, a runway strong enough to survive or recover, a tanker close enough to refuel it, fuel and weapons moving fast enough to support the next mission, maintenance crews able to keep the aircraft ready after long flights and constant pressure. If that chain holds, the F-35 is a serious problem for China. It can see, strike, share information, and help coordinate the wider fight. But if that chain bends, everything changes. A runway crater does not destroy the F-35. It delays it. A tanker force farther back does not defeat the F-35. It shortens its time in the fight. A base under missile threat does not make the aircraft obsolete. It makes every launch more difficult, more expensive, and more dependent on the rest of the network working perfectly. And that is the point. China does not need to beat the F-35 in a clean aircraft contest to create a strategic problem. It only needs to make the aircraft harder to use when America needs it most. Later launches, longer routes, fewer sorties, more pressure on tankers, more pressure on crews, more pressure on allies whose bases suddenly become part of the front line. That is why this issue matters now. The F-35 is still one of the most capable fighters ever built, but in the Western Pacific, capability is not enough by itself. The aircraft has to arrive. It has to stay. It has to return. And then it has to do it again. That is the real range problem, not the distance printed on a spec sheet. The distance between having a powerful aircraft and having that aircraft available at the decisive moment. Because the next Pacific Air War may not begin with an F-35 being shot down. It may begin with a runway cratered, a tanker pushed too far back, and a fighter still powerful enough to win, but too late to decide the opening move.